Hi everybody, my name is Payman and I'm going to do a book summary for The Guardian, The League of Nations and the Crisis of Empire by Susan Pedersen. So, why am I interested to read this book? It is very interesting. History is shaped by conflicts among nations. What these conflicts are doing, they are reshaping the national boundaries of nations. Usually, the wars that are happening are at the large scale, if it is affecting the entire world. We could talk about Napoleon War, how that shaped the Europe, Bismarck War, how that shaped the European countries, particularly France and Spain. In this one, it's a different approach. World War I happened and it had a very devastating effect on humankind. Now, there are people who are altruistic and they have a good intentions that they're coming together to become one voice to prevent another global conflict. And that's what interests me. What these individuals, these prominent people, that they were mostly academic post World War One, that they want to prevent another global war. Unfortunately, the war is an ongoing issue. It is going to happen no matter what. But what can we do to prevent it? We are learning a lesson from the past, what the other people took steps to stop other conflict war. Perhaps a day will come that we will resolve our differences by means of diplomacy. That's what we are hoping for. Okay, um, I have written about the summary. It is in a written, and I'm going to look at the monitor of my computer because it is a lot easy for me to read it. I may not have a eye contact with the camera because I'm not a professional person for that part of it, to make a proper eye contact and talk. So it's going to be a little bit of a difficulty over that. Book description. So the book title, The Guardians, The League of Nations, and the Crisis of Empire by Susan Pedersen. I sincerely apologize for Susan for mispronouncing their last name. And it was published by Oxford University Press. And it was date of publish is 2015. It has 12 chapters plus conclusion, and it has 571 pages. It was a really beautiful book when I was reading it, and I enjoyed it, every word of it. So we want to talk about World War One. What happened? How did that happen? So what did cause it? Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated on June 28, 1914 in Sarajevo by Gavrilo Princip. I apologize for mispronouncing this person's first name and last name. A Serbian nationalist, sought to separate Austro-Hungary's South Slav province, including Bosnia, to establish a greater Serbian state, Yugoslavia, and diminish Austro-Hungarian influence. This event triggered World War I, which began on July 28, 1940, and concluded on November 11, 1918 at 11 a.m. The armistice that ended hostility on the Western Front was signed in a railroad carriage in the, I cannot pronounce this first name, okay? So because it is French, I don't have a, I don't understand. Like I cannot pronounce French words, so I'm gonna spell it Compiègne. It is in France. The Treaty of Versailles, which formally ended the state of war between Germany and the Allied powers, was signed exactly 5 years after the assassination. There is another key component in human history that shape Europe, European countries, and the rest of the world. This is the Paris Peace Conference held in 1990 and 1920. This is very important piece that how um, politicians from European countries were trying to hold on power, and they were kind of dissecting the developing nations among themselves. I'm gonna move the camera a little bit, have a better view with my phone. I'm doing this. The conference produced 5 treaties that redefined territorial boundaries in Europe, Asia, Africa, and Pacific Islands, and imposed financial penalties on the defeated nations. Germany, Austria-Hungary, Turkey, and Bulgaria were excluded from the negotiations, contributing to long-lasting political resentment. Although Russia had representation, it was not by its legitimate government. I also would like to bring to the attention when revolution happened in Russia, the Bolshevik Revolution, it had very deep impact in European countries because that was a worker revolution in Russia, and the idea was to spread it to around the world. So that's what they wanted to do, to spread the revolution around the world. And what happens, the workers' revolution was against the fabric society of European countries that was aristocracy, monarchy, and they didn't want that revolution comes into their own country. So they wanted to keep it way far away from themselves. And that's why European countries really wanted to keep Russia at the bay. They didn't want to come, their ideas, values doesn't penetrate among European countries. So now we are having this. What is the purpose of having the League of Nations? Okay, the League of Nations was established to prevent future global conflicts. However, the agreements reached at the peace conference are widely regarded as a pivotal moment in the 20th century geopolitics. They are believed to have contributed to the outbreak of World War II. So, as these politicians and good intentioned people are coming together to prevent another war, but the way they managed the Paris Peace Conference and Treaty of Versailles, because they put the maximized pressure on Germany by asking lots of money that Germany couldn't pay back to them. It caused super hyperinflation in Germany economy and caused collapse. That's why it allowed Hitler to rise to power, and people began to listen to him, and it started World War II. That's what happened. So this is a very important history. But one of the important character that we need to know is Woodrow Wilson. Okay, if you're a student, if you want to, your grade little bit come up little bit here, try to when you're writing essay about this topic, try to use Woodrow Wilson. I know back in the 90s, University of Toronto had a building named after Woodrow Wilson, or there was something to do with Woodrow Wilson, like area that they liked to talk about it. So what is so significant about Woodrow Wilson? Promoted the principle of self-determination during and after World War One, arguing that nations and people should have the right to self-governance and sovereignty. You see, it's going back to the time um, then Serbian separatists assassinated Archduke Ferdinand. And again, this concept of self-determination is emerging every single time in our history. For example, we have not everybody, I'm not saying that everybody, I'm saying that there are people in each country that they want to separate from the rest of the, from their national, from the country that they are in. For example, I'm talking about Quebecers who speak French and they say we are a distinct society. But not every time there was a national referendum that to separate Quebec from the rest of the Canada, it did not succeed. It fell. Okay, so but it is very interesting at that time that what does self-determination means. That's a very important point that we need to think about it. And that self-determination, for example, maybe it's the idea of a few, but not everybody, and it may cause civil war. It may cause something that we really don't want to go at. But at that particular historical moment, it was very effective for the African nations, the way they define themselves, not me, that they saw themselves as a nation that they could have self-determination because they were being colonized by the European countries such as France, England, Germany, uh, Belgium, uh, so they could have their own self autonomy. So other people are not telling them what to do, because when we are, it's not just going over there, just grabbing, for example, their pen and walking away. It was human rights violation that was taking place, horrific human rights violations. So that's why this self-determination is very important. Maybe at this particular moment, for me, it is, oh, self-determination. What does it mean? But when we are talking and reading history of uh, countries that they were being colonized, it was huge. Particularly Ottoman Empire, where we are talking about it after World War One, Ottoman Empire disintegrated, and it created Syria, Lebanon, and other countries in the Middle East. So that is very important. It's this self-determination, how it shaped the Middle East, how it shaped African nations in the continent of Africa. So it's very, very important. So the concept was central to his 14 point. I'm talking about Woodrow Wilson. I know I went a little bit off topic, or I didn't go off topic. I was trying to explain it. But Woodrow Wilson had 14 points and sought to dismantle European empires by establishing new independent states aligned with the national aspiration of various groups. Although the policy advanced democratic ideal, its application was largely limited to Europe and frequently neglected colonial population in Asia and Africa. One of the things, again, I like to point out, like for example, um, you're a student, university student or high school student, you're looking for something to get the A, and you don't have much of a time to read the whole book. But before I start reading this whole book and see, hey, this book really doesn't help my cause to help me to write my essay. But this is a really good piece. You read it, if it's applied, pick it up. The mandate system of the League Nations, established by Article 22 of the Covenant in 1990, was intended to administrate former Ottoman and German territories after World War One. These territories were assigned to Allied powers because they were not yet prepared for self-governance, and the stated objective was to prepare them for eventual independence. The mandate system. Okay, we're talking about the mandate system that is, uh, for me, at the personal level, I had a difficulty to understand what is a mandate system really. Is it like another way of colonizing these countries? Because hey, we are the liberator, like France, England saying we are the liberator here, and now we are not going to call you my colony, we're going to call you mandate. That's how I saw it. On page 23, the author says to explain how that wartime scramble gave way within a year to plan to entrust civilized peoples with the benevolent tutelage of the rest, we have to look beyond imperial statement and their machines. There is a reason for this. Faced with the Bolshevik challenge and an American public unwilling to fight a war for imperial aim, a vain and bookish American president promised a peace of a new kind, a peace without annexation. On page 29, the author says, on January 30th, 1919, the Supreme Council agreed that Ottoman Middle East and the former German colonies being inhabited by the peoples not yet able to stand by themselves by advanced nations on the principle that the well-being and development of such peoples form a sacred trust of civilization. Three levels of mandate defined. Okay, um, I'm not living in that historical moment, so for me is a little bit difficult to grasp it. Why European countries see themselves above other nations? Why do they feel that way? That has a little bit racism tone into it. That when they say, for example, Serbia is trying to form itself as a nation, and you cannot be an independent nation. You need to be underneath of me. You need to listen to me. I'm going to tell you how to govern yourself. Um, I have, that's what I mean, is kind of a mandate itself is a form of a colonization. And I'm having a discussion here. Okay, I'm respecting what how people are thinking, but because I'm not living in that era, because when you're living in that era, you're grasping, you have a full grasp of what is happening. So that's very important. So how did they create it, the mandate? Purpose. The mandate system was intended to serve as a tutelage, guiding dependent population towards self-determination and seeking to prevent exploitation. That was the purpose. Classification. Territories are divided into three classes based on their level of development. Class A, Middle East, former Ottoman territories, Palestine, Iraq, Syria, that are nearing independence or require temporary administration. Class B, Central Africa, former German colonies, like Cameroons, that require control to protect the rights of their inhabitants. It is extensively was discussed in this book. Class C, South West Africa, Pacific German territories, West Africa, New Guinea, that are administered as part of their mandatory power. Supervision. The Permanent Mandate Commission oversees the administration of these territories to ensure compliance with the League of Nations standard. Mandatory power. The primary power responsible for administering these territories include the UK, France, Belgium, Japan, and South Africa. This was like when you're reading the book, you really could see Japan is trying to, and Belgium, all of them, not just Japan, was trying to take land. This is my land. I want to take it. I own it. Like you cannot take it away from me. And Japan was, because according to this book, Japanese people were feeling like being pushed away because they were not European. Okay, so they were feeling racism. Japanese were feeling racism here, so they want to prove themselves that they are a powerful nation, which is great. Please, Japan, be a powerful nation. You have done a great job economic-wise, technology. Please do it. Okay, we are not here to put down any country. I'm just here to have a healthy discussion. Purpose versus reality. Although the system was designed to guide former Ottoman and German territories towards self-determination, it has been widely criticized as an international sanctioned form of colonies that primarily served the interests of European powers. Class structure: mandates were categorized into a class based on their readiness for independence. Class A include territories in the Middle East which were considered closer to achieving independence than Class B and C, which comprised regions in Africa and the Pacific. Supervision: mandatory powers were obligated to submit annual reports to the Permanent Mandate Commission. The sham process: local communities' preferences were largely disregarded, with Britain and France predetermining territorial division, particularly in the Middle East. The system's failure: violence and instability. The system often established borders that disregarded local, ethnic, or regional lines, leading to long-term conflicts such as Israel-Palestine conflict and civil wars in Iraq and Syria. Stunt development: development in many territories were hindered to further the economic and strategic interests of Britain, France, and other mandatory nations. Weak accountability: the Permanent Mandate Commission lacked the authority to effectively oversee to mandate territories, rendering its accountability mechanic ineffectiveness. The weakness, for example, right now the United Nations wants to end the war when, like, for example, they're passing a resolution or something like that. It cannot impose it. It's not legally binding. That's the legal term. It's just a piece of paper. I could write a piece of paper, put it here, but it's not legally binding. So that is the part of the League of Nations lacking, that lacked. And that's what the United Nations is lacking, to be legally binding. It's very, very difficult to have something on the table that the United Nations could enforce it. It's very difficult. Suppression of self-rule: despite promise of autonomy, independence movement were frequently suppressed, with the mandate essentially function as a new form of colonial rule. Ultimately, while the system was intended to facilitate the transition of territories after World War One, it is widely regarded as a failure in achieving its goal of promoting genuine self-determination. The author, on page 29, mentioned the situation of the Kurds and Armenia being still in limbo. Okay, for example, there are ethnic groups, doesn't have to be Middle East, the continent of Africa, because the way they came and they divide them. For example, France, England, Belgium, they say they took a ruler. It's a fact. They took a ruler, they put it on a map. They say from here to here. That's why the lines are very straight. If you look at the map of the African nations, it's very straight, and they divide it. So what happens? All of a sudden, two villages that they were speaking the same language, that share the same value and wisdom, now they're split. Now they're split. They cannot connect, and like you got to do it this way. They have to do it that way, or maybe there was some kind of a dispute between people, and it did not resolve. That's why we see conflict in African nations. On page 406, the author says this book has atomized a system in motion. It has sought to explain not what the League said it did, but rather to show how it practiced and scrutinized. Publicity, legalism, pump up against the aims, claims, and interests of the powers and people with which it was involved, and by doing so produce meaning and outcomes no one had intended. The League helped make the end of empire imaginable and normative statehood possible, not because the empire's will it so. I'm sorry, I have a cough. A normative statehood possible, not because the empire's will let or so the covenant prescribe it, but because the dynamic of internationalization changed everything, including how dependent peoples would bid for a statehood. With that statehood would henceforth mean, and whether empires would think territorial control essential to the maintenance of global power. The man and woman, it's just one woman, and you could see it in the picture. Um, and women who had been the heart and soul of the mandate system. The surviving members of the Permanent Mandate Commission watched the death of the League and the emergence of the trustship system with mixed emotion. Long serving and for the most part like-minded, by 1940 they had become friends as well as co-workers. William Rappert, living in his house in the Juno Hills, still hard at work at university, tried through the war to keep track of the fate of his colleagues. In summary, a small group of academic, informed individuals collaborated to promote global peace and stability. I highly recommend this book. It's the dollar, the money, maybe, I don't know, the spending currency of your country, your euro. It's a really good book to read because it helps you that to understand why we have United Nations. Sometimes we are hearing they say, "Oh, forget about United Nations; doesn't do anything." Is it true? Maybe we need to reform the United Nations to make sure we have peace. As many people are going toward the war, there are other people who are striving for peace. That's important. And I'm not talking about like certain people who are genuinely seeking peace. That's what I'm talking about. Cheers.